Somewhere in the Caribbean Sea, around the year 1718, a ship cuts through warm turquoise water under a sky full of stars. On its deck, a man who answers to no king, no governor, no god, stands at the helm with a stolen compass in one hand and a bottle of rum in the other. He is dressed in a coat he looted from a Spanish merchant vessel. His crew fears him. His enemies underestimate him, and history will forget his name entirely. Now trace your finger across a map. Start in Nassau, in the Bahamas, the beating heart of the pirate republic. Drag it south through the Windward Passage between Cuba and Hispaniola, the most dangerous choke point in the Atlantic trade routes. Sweep east along the coast of Jamaica, where Port Royal once stood as the richest and most wicked city on earth before an earthquake swallowed it into the sea in 1692. Then pull your finger northwest, past the Cayman Islands, up through the Gulf of Mexico, and across the Atlantic to the shores of West Africa, where pirate captains hunted slave ships not out of moral conviction, but because those vessels carried gold dust, ivory, and trade goods worth a fortune. This map, these waters, these routes, they belong to real men, real criminals, real legends. And 300 years later, a Hollywood actor stumbled into a costume fitting, ignored every note the studio gave him, and built one of cinema's most iconic characters by borrowing pieces of their lives. This is the true history behind Captain Jack Sparrow, not the Disney version, the real one. When screenwriters Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio first drafted the screenplay for Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, they had a problem. The script was good. The story worked. But the lead character was essentially a standard swashbuckler. Think Errol Flynn. Handsome, brave, noble, and honestly a little boring by modern standards. The studio wanted exactly that. A safe, bankable action hero who could sell popcorn and lunchboxes. Then Johnny Depp showed up to set, and everything changed. Depp had done his own research. He had studied the Golden Age of Piracy, the period between roughly 1650 and 1730, when thousands of pirates terrorized the Atlantic and Caribbean. He was fascinated by the idea that pirates were essentially the rock stars of their era. They rejected authority. They lived outside the law. They dressed flamboyantly, drank constantly, and cultivated personal brands that made their names more powerful than cannons. Depp saw the parallel immediately. Pirates weren't soldiers. They were performers. So he based Jack Sparrow on Keith Richards, not Keith Richards the musician, Keith Richards the survivor. The man who had ingested enough substances to kill a small village and somehow kept standing. The man who moved through the world with a looseness that made you wonder whether he was a genius or had simply burned out every rational circuit in his brain. Depp borrowed the walk, the slurred confidence, the coal-lined eyes, and the sense that this person could collapse at any moment but somehow always landed on his feet. Disney executives reportedly hated it. There are well-documented stories of studio heads watching early footage and panicking. One executive allegedly asked if Depp was playing the character drunk. Another asked if Jack Sparrow was supposed to be gay. Depp's response, according to multiple interviews, was essentially to keep doing exactly what he was doing and dare them to fire him. They didn't fire him. The movie made $654 million worldwide, and Jack Sparrow became one of the most recognizable characters in film history. But here is the part that gets overlooked. Keith Richards gave Jack Sparrow his swagger, his attitude, his style. What Richards did not give him was his story. The story of Jack Sparrow, the actual narrative bones of who this character is, what he does, and why audiences find him compelling, comes from real pirates. Specific pirates. Men and women whose actual lives were stranger, darker, and more dramatic than anything Disney ever put on screen. And the first one shares his name, Calico Jack Rackham. If you have ever seen a pirate flag with two crossed swords beneath a skull, you are looking at Calico Jack's design. He is credited with creating one of the most recognizable versions of the Jolly Roger, the flag that became synonymous with piracy itself. His nickname came from the calico fabric he wore, brightly colored cotton clothes that made him stand out from every other captain on the water. In an era when most sailors dressed in whatever rags they could find, Rackham chose fashion. Sound familiar? Rackham operated primarily in the Caribbean during the final years of the Golden Age of Piracy, roughly 1718 to 1720. He was not the most successful pirate. He was not the most feared. He was not even the most competent. His prize captures were relatively modest. Fishing sloops, small merchant vessels, the occasional lightly armed trader. He never took a warship. He never blockaded a port. He never amassed a fleet. What Rackham was, more than anything, was memorable. He had a gift for spectacle and for cultivating a personal brand that far exceeded his actual threat level. Before we go any further, I need to stop for a second, because what I've been showing you in these videos only scratches the surface. And I realized at some point that the full picture, the actual pirate code, word for word, the real punishment records, the exact treasure division shares, the ports that secretly funded them, it doesn't fit in a video. I put it all into one document, the Black Flag Codex. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now, let's keep going. His ship, the Kingston, was modest by pirate standards, but Rackham commanded it with enough flair and confidence that his reputation grew far beyond his actual accomplishments. Governors wrote letters about him. Naval captains were dispatched to find him. His name appeared in newspapers across the colonies. And nearly all of that attention came from his personality, not from his plunder. His personal life was even more dramatic than his career at sea. Rackham fell in love with Anne Bonny, who was at the time married to a small-time pirate and informant named James Bonny. Anne left her husband for Rackham, and the two of them sailed together, which was almost unheard of in the early 1700s. Having a woman on a pirate ship was considered catastrophically bad luck by most crews. Rackham did not care. Anne Bonny was, by every historical account, tougher than most of the men on board. Then there was Mary Red, who had been disguised as a man and serving on a different vessel before joining Rackham's crew. When her secret came out, Rackham reportedly shrugged it off. He now had 2 women fighters on his ship, both of whom proved themselves in combat repeatedly. When the British Navy finally caught up with Rackham in October 1720, most of his crew was below deck, too drunk to fight. The only people who actually stood and fought the boarding party were Anne Bonny and Mary Red. Rackham and his men had to be dragged up from below. Rackham was hanged in Port Royal, Jamaica in November 1720. His body was displayed in a gibbet, a metal cage, at the entrance to the harbor as a warning to other pirates. Anne Bonny's last recorded words to him before his execution were reportedly something along the lines of, "If he had fought like a man, he would not be dying like a dog." Jack Sparrow's name, his flamboyant dress, his tendency to survive through charm and luck rather than skill and violence, his complicated relationships with powerful women. All of it traces back to Calico Jack Rackham. But Rackham only gave Sparrow one layer. The next layer comes from a pirate who terrified the entire Atlantic. Edward Teach, Blackbeard, the most famous pirate who ever lived, and arguably the most theatrical. Blackbeard understood something that most criminals throughout history have missed entirely. Fear is a weapon, and fear is a performance. Before every engagement, Teach would weave slow-burning fuses into his enormous black beard and light them. When his ship pulled alongside a target, the crew on the other vessel would see a man wreathed in smoke, his face half hidden behind a curtain of smoldering hair, his eyes wild, pistols strapped across his chest in a bandolier, swords at both hips. He looked like a demon that had crawled out of the ocean. Most ships surrendered without a fight. This was the genius of Blackbeard. He rarely needed to kill anyone because his appearance did the killing for him. The reputation he built through pure theatricality meant that merchants would see his flag, the horned skeleton stabbing a heart with a spear, and immediately lower their own. Why risk your life fighting a man who looked like the devil himself when you could just hand over the cargo and sail away with your crew intact? Teach operated out of Nassau and along the coast of the American colonies, particularly the Carolinas. At the height of his power, he had a small fleet of ships, the largest being the Queen Anne's Revenge, a former French slave ship called La Concorde that he had captured off the coast of Martinique in late 1717 and refitted with 40 guns. The Queen Anne's Revenge was enormous by pirate standards, over 200 tons, large enough to intimidate anything short of a Royal Navy warship. Teach sailed it like a weapon of psychological warfare, pulling alongside smaller vessels that had no chance of fighting back, letting the crew see the size of the ship, the number of cannons, and the terrifying figure standing at the bow with smoke curling from his beard. He blockaded the port of Charleston, South Carolina, for an entire week in May of 1718, holding the city hostage until the governor sent out a chest of medicine. Not gold, not silver, medicine. Historians still debate what illness was spreading through his crew, likely syphilis or dysentery. But Blackbeard valued keeping his men alive and functional more than he valued treasure. The blockade was audacious. Charleston was one of the wealthiest cities in the American colonies, and Teach simply parked his fleet at the harbor entrance and waited. Several prominent citizens were taken hostage from captured vessels. The governor had no choice but to comply. He was eventually killed in a brutal fight on November 22, 1718, off the coast of Ocracoke Island in North Carolina. A British naval lieutenant named Robert Maynard led the attack. Teach reportedly took 5 gunshot wounds and 20 sword cuts before he finally went down. Maynard cut off his head and hung it from the bowsprit of his sloop. Jack Sparrow's love of theatricality, his understanding that reputation is more valuable than violence, his ability to make enemies hesitate through sheer unpredictability. All of this comes from Blackbeard. When Sparrow walks into a room and every person in it either reaches for a weapon or backs away. That is Blackbeard's legacy at work. The pirate who understood that the story people tell about you is more powerful than anything you could actually do. But if Blackbeard gave Sparrow his theatricality, the next pirate gave him something even more important. His ending, or rather, his ability to avoid one. Henry Every, also spelled Avery, also known as Long Ben, the pirate who pulled off the single largest heist in the history of piracy and then vanished completely. In 1695, Every captured the Ganges Sawai, a Mughal treasure ship belonging to the Grand Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb of India. The ship was carrying gold, silver, jewels, and wealthy passengers returning from a pilgrimage to Mecca. Historians estimate the total value of the haul at somewhere between 200,000 and 600,000 British pounds, which in today's currency translates to tens of millions of dollars. Some estimates push it even higher. The capture of the Ganges Sawai was not clean. Every's crew brutalized the passengers. The incident caused a major diplomatic crisis between England and the Mughal Empire. The East India Company's trading posts in India were besieged by furious Mughal soldiers. The English government, terrified of losing its lucrative trade relationship, launched one of the first worldwide manhunts in history, specifically to find Henry Every. They never did. Every divided the treasure among his crew, sailed to the Bahamas, bribed the governor, and then scattered. He and his share of the fortune disappeared entirely. Some accounts claim he ended up in Ireland. Others say Madagascar. One persistent legend puts him in Devon, England, living quietly under a false name. The truth is, nobody knows. Henry Every pulled off the crime of the century, triggered an international incident, became the most wanted man in the world, and walked away clean. This is Jack Sparrow's ultimate fantasy, the pirate who cannot be caught. Every time Sparrow slips out of an impossible situation, every time the noose is around his neck and he somehow wriggles free, that is Henry Every's ghost. The idea that a pirate could beat everyone, take everything, and disappear. What makes Every's story even more remarkable is what happened after he vanished. He became the first pirate celebrity. Within 2 years of his disappearance, pamphlets were circulating across England describing his exploits in increasingly exaggerated terms. Stop for a second. What you just heard about the pirate code is the part that rewrites everything you thought you knew. But it only lands when you see the actual shares, the exact fractions written into the Articles of Agreement, the punishments, the port records, the names of the men who funded them from government offices. It's all in the Black Flag Codex, linked in the description. 5 seconds, grab it now, because what comes next builds directly on it. Link is below. QR code is on your screen. Ballads were sung in taverns from London to Bristol. A stage play called The Successful Pirate was performed in London's Theatre Royal in 1713, portraying Every as a romantic hero who had established his own kingdom on Madagascar. Daniel Defoe, who would later write Robinson Crusoe, published a fictional account called The King of Pirates that portrayed Every as a gentleman adventurer living in luxury on a tropical island surrounded by loyal followers and treasure. None of it was true, but all of it was believed. Every became larger in legend than he ever was in life, precisely because no one knew the truth. The mystery made the myth. The absence of a definitive ending meant that every storyteller could write their own. He could be living in splendor or dying in poverty. He could be laughing at the world or haunted by guilt. The blank space at the end of his story was an invitation for centuries of fiction. Jack Sparrow operates on the same principle. Half of what people say about him in the films is exaggerated or invented. But the legend is the point. The legend keeps him alive. Now, if those three pirates gave Sparrow his name, his theatricality, and his ability to escape, the next one gave him something darker, his moral ambiguity. Charles Vane was not charming, he was not funny, he was not likable, and that is precisely why he matters. Vane operated in the Caribbean during the same period as Blackbeard and Rackham, and he was widely considered the most ruthless pirate captain of the era. While most successful pirates used the threat of violence to avoid actual violence, Vane embraced it. He tortured prisoners. He burned captured ships with their crews still aboard. He once sent a fire ship, a vessel deliberately set ablaze, directly into the middle of a British naval formation guarding the harbor at Nassau. When Woodes Rogers, the first royal governor of the Bahamas, arrived in Nassau in 1718 with an offer of amnesty for any pirate who surrendered, most pirates took the deal. Blackbeard had already left for the Carolinas. Rackham would eventually accept a pardon, briefly, before returning to piracy. But Vane refused outright. He sailed directly past the British warships, firing his cannons as he went, and escaped into open water. His crew eventually turned on him. A man named Calico Jack Rackham, in one of history's neater ironies, led the mutiny that deposed Vane from his own ship. Vane ended up shipwrecked, captured, and hanged in Port Royal in 1721. Jack Sparrow's moral complexity, his willingness to betray allies, his shifting loyalties, his ability to be genuinely selfish one moment and surprisingly noble the next, that tension comes from the real world of pirate politics that Vane inhabited. In the Golden Age, no pirate captain held power through loyalty alone. They held it through calculation, manipulation, and the constant threat that they might do something unpredictable. Sparrow lives in that same gray space, but the pirate who contributed the most to Jack Sparrow's impossible list of accomplishments, the one whose actual biography reads like a Hollywood screenplay, was Bartholomew Roberts. Black Bart. Roberts captured over 400 ships during his career. 400. That number is not a typo. It is the single highest total of any pirate in recorded history. He operated from roughly 1719 to 1722, a period of just 3 years, and in that time he terrorized the Atlantic from Brazil to Newfoundland to West Africa. He captured so many vessels that insurance rates for Atlantic shipping skyrocketed during his active period. Lloyd's of London, the insurance market, was partly shaped by the financial chaos Roberts caused, and he did it all while dressed immaculately. Roberts was known for wearing a crimson waistcoat and breeches, a hat with a red feather, a diamond cross necklace, and carrying 2 pairs of pistols on a silk sling across his shoulders. He reportedly refused to wear anything that was not of the finest quality. He drank only tea, not rum. He demanded that his crew observe the Sabbath. He was, by pirate standards, an absolute contradiction. He also wrote one of history's most famous pirate codes. Roberts's articles, the rules his crew agreed to follow, included compensation for injuries sustained in battle. A pirate who lost a right arm received 600 pieces of 8. A left arm was worth 500. The loss of a leg paid the same. These articles also guaranteed democratic voting on major decisions, an equal share of food and drink for all crew members, an early lights-out policy requiring candles to be extinguished by 8 in the evening, and a prohibition on gambling aboard ship. Roberts understood that piracy was a business, and he ran it like one. Every man knew his share, every man knew the rules, and every man knew the consequence of breaking them. His ship was run with more organization than many Royal Navy vessels of the same period. While British captains ruled through the authority of the Crown and the threat of flogging, Roberts led through a contract. His crew chose to follow him because the system worked. When he captured a ship, the division of spoils was handled according to the articles. There was no arguing, there was no favoritism. The fact that a pirate crew operating outside of every law in the Western world had more transparent governance than most European navies is one of the strangest footnotes in maritime history. Roberts was killed in battle on February 10, 1722, when a broadside from the HMS Swallow struck him in the throat while he stood on deck in his finest clothes. His crew, following his standing orders, threw his body overboard before it could be captured and displayed by the British. They wanted his body to belong to the sea, not to a gibbet. When Jack Sparrow recites his impossible resume in the films, the long list of legendary feats that may or may not have actually happened, that is Roberts. The pirate whose real accomplishments sound fictional. The captain who treated piracy as a profession and held himself to standards that made no sense in context but somehow worked. Now, pull the map back one more time. Look at Nassau again, because the pirates who inspired Jack Sparrow did not operate in isolation. They lived, drank, fought, and died within a very specific world. And that world had a capital, the Republic of Pirates. That is what historians call the period between roughly 1706 and 1718, when Nassau, on the island of New Providence in the Bahamas, functioned as a pirate-governed settlement. It was not a nation in any official sense. There was no constitution, no elected government, no formal law. But it operated as a functioning society with its own economy, its own social hierarchies, and its own rough form of democracy. At its peak, Nassau sheltered over 1,000 pirates. Ships came and went freely. Stolen goods were traded openly in an informal market where Spanish doubloons, English pounds, and Dutch guilders all circulated simultaneously. Taverns operated around the clock. Women ran boarding houses and supply shops. Escaped slaves found a kind of rough freedom among the pirates, who were generally more egalitarian about race than the colonial societies they preyed upon. The harbor was full of captured vessels in various states of repair, and the beaches were lined with careened ships having their hulls scraped of barnacles. The smell of tar, gunpowder, rotting seaweed, and stale alcohol would have hit you before you even stepped off a boat. It was a city built entirely on theft, and for about 12 years it worked. Not well, not cleanly, but it functioned. Pirates elected their own magistrates. Disputes were settled through negotiation, or, when that failed, through violence that was at least somewhat regulated. Tavern owners extended credit, shipwrights repaired vessels, prostitution and gambling flourished. It was, in its own chaotic way, a society. Historians have called it one of the earliest examples of democratic self-governance in the Americas, which is an incredible claim to make about a community of professional criminals, but it holds up to scrutiny. The pirates of Nassau were not a unified force. They were rival captains with competing interests who happened to share the same port. Blackbeard, Rackham, Vane, Benjamin Hornigold, Samuel Bellamy. They all passed through Nassau at various points. Alliances formed and dissolved constantly. A captain who was your drinking partner on Monday might steal your crew on Wednesday and be your enemy by Friday. This is the world of Tortuga in the Pirates of the Caribbean films. The chaotic, lawless port where Jack Sparrow recruits crews, makes deals, and navigates a web of shifting allegiances. Tortuga is Nassau with a different name. The energy, the danger, the sense that anything could happen, and probably would, that all comes directly from the historical pirate republic. What killed the Republic of Pirates was not a battle, it was a bureaucrat. Woodes Rogers, a former privateer himself, arrived in Nassau in July 1718 with a royal commission, 3 warships, and a stack of pardons. He offered amnesty to any pirate who surrendered. Most did. The ones who refused, like Vane, were hunted down. Within 2 years, Nassau was transformed from a pirate haven into a colonial outpost. The Golden Age was effectively over, but the stories survived, and they grew. The mythology that grew around these real pirates is what ultimately makes Jack Sparrow possible. By the time the 18th century ended, pirate legends had already been transformed into adventure stories. Captain Charles Johnson's A General History of the Pirates, published in 1724, was essentially the first pirate encyclopedia, and it was wildly popular. Johnson, whose real identity remains debated by scholars to this day, took the actual histories of Blackbeard, Roberts, Rackham, Every, and dozens of others, and shaped them into narratives that emphasized their daring, their cleverness, and their larger-than-life personalities. Johnson's book created the pirate myth as we know it. Buried treasure, the Jolly Roger, the pirate code, walking the plank. All of these tropes either originated or were popularized in that single volume. Robert Louis Stevenson read Johnson's book before writing Treasure Island in 1883. J.M. Barrie read it before creating Captain Hook in 1904. And the screenwriters of Pirates of the Caribbean almost certainly had it on their desks. The line from Calico Jack Rackham to Captain Jack Sparrow runs through 300 years of storytelling. Each generation borrowed from the last, embellishing, romanticizing, and filing off the uglier edges. The real pirates were slave traders, murderers, and thieves. The fictional pirates became rebels, adventurers, and anti-heroes. Somewhere in between is the truth, and somewhere in that truth is the DNA of Jack Sparrow. Consider what the character actually is when you strip away the comedy and the special effects. Jack Sparrow is a man who survives through deception rather than violence. He values freedom above wealth. He operates outside of every institution, rejecting both the pirate hierarchy and the colonial government. He is chronically unreliable, but occasionally capable of genuine loyalty. He is always outnumbered, always outgunned, and always somehow one step ahead. That is not a fictional invention. That is a composite portrait drawn from real men who lived and died in the Caribbean 3 centuries ago. Rackham gave him his name and his style. Blackbeard gave him his performance. Every gave him his escape. Vane gave him his moral gray area. Roberts gave him his impossible legend. And Nassau gave him his world. Each of these pieces fits together so seamlessly that audiences forget the character was assembled from fragments of actual history. They forget that the man in the tricorn hat is, underneath the eyeliner and the stumbling walk, a walking museum exhibit of the Golden Age of Piracy wearing a costume. The genius of Jack Sparrow, and the reason the character resonated so deeply with audiences around the world, is that he feels real because, in pieces, he was real. Johnny Depp may have channeled Keith Richards for the walk and the slurred speech, but underneath that performance is a character built from genuine history. From real men who sailed real ships through real danger, who faced real gallows and real cannonballs, who drank real rum and signed real articles of piracy, who lived outside the boundaries of their world and paid for it, usually at the end of a rope. Jack Sparrow gets to live. That is the fantasy. That is the trick the writers and Depp pulled off together, whether they fully understood it or not. He gets to be all of them. Rackham's flair, Blackbeard's theater, Every's vanishing act, Roberts's impossible resume, Vane's moral ambiguity, but without any of their consequences. He gets the adventure without the hanging, the freedom without the price, the legend without the gibbet. Maybe that is why we love him. Not because he is a great pirate, but because he is the pirate we all wish the real ones could have been. The Caribbean is quieter now. The harbors that once sheltered Blackbeard's fleet are full of cruise ships and fishing boats. Nassau is a tourist destination. Port Royal is an archaeological site. The Windward Passage is a shipping lane for container vessels. But if you go to one of those islands at night and you stand on the shore looking out at dark water, you can feel something, an echo. The sense that these waters remember what happened here. That somewhere in the gaps between the waves, there are still stories that have never been told. Some of them are true, some of them are legend, and the best ones, the ones that last 300 years and end up on a movie screen, are a little bit of both.